Yo, what is going on, everybody? Welcome into another episode of the BeBall Jones podcast. And today I have a very special guest. I'm excited about this one. As you guys know, of course, I'm a basketball trainer, but I also like to sprinkle in the mental game for you guys. And today I have a official, legit person to come and talk to you guys about the mental game. I got my little, tidbits of like what I think I know about the mental game, but I have like an official, like somebody pays her to talk about the mental side. Like I just do it because I like doing it. Nobody like officially pays me to do it, but she's like making a living doing this. So I like to introduce you guys a professional. Like I'm like the semi-pro, but she's like the pro of the mental game. So introduce you guys to Lauren Ammon. How you doing?
Hello. I'm doing so well. Thank you so much for the introduction.
No problem. So give I gave you a little introduction, but like introduce yourself to the people a little more formally. So who are you? What exactly do you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my name is Lauren Ammon. I work with elite high school and college athletes to train their minds like they train their bodies in the simplest form, the easiest definition. So, how I got here is a 40-year journey, but I'll make it like 2 minutes. So, I started swimming. That was my sport of choice when I was 5 years old and absolutely fell in love with the sport, loved everything about it, loved who I was as a part of that sport. I had the opportunity to swim for the same club team for 13 seasons while swimming for my high school, then had the privilege and honor to go swim on a D1 full ride at Eastern Michigan University, graduated or retired as a high school state champion in the state of Kentucky, a top 3 finisher in the Mid-American Conference, which is what Eastern is in. Though I retired after nearly 2 decades with that thought of, ugh, could have just been so much more had I been able to get out of my own head. And I've already dated myself, but I'll date myself even further. So that my prime was in the late 90s, early 2000s. And at the time, it was really like, just put your head down, shut up, you're good, it's fine, keep going. It'll all work out in the end. Logically, I knew that. Emotionally, I had a really hard time kind of separating and being able to like find my way out of that emotional chaos, right? Because I put so much emphasis on who I was as a swimmer and it was really tied to my identity. So when I retired, it was kind of like, okay, there's nothing I can do about it now. So, I went into my adult life. I had a very successful career in human resources, just found that really wasn't my space. I didn't feel as if I fit into corporate America. So I went and got my official coaching certification over a year-long program from the top program here in the United States. Started my business really focused on leadership development, creative transition, because that's what I knew in corporate America. Was like, okay, I left corporate America for a very specific reason. And part of this was doing this kind of work. And it was one of those moments, just quote unquote random. Although when you look back, it's maybe not necessarily as random as I once thought. It was during the 2020 Olympics, which we all know was a year behind schedule. And it was the night that Simone Biles removed herself from competition. It was the same night that Katie Ledecky won gold in the 1500 meter freestyle that women ever got, the first time women ever got to swim it at the Olympics, but had a disappointing swim. She was about 20 seconds off of her world record, and just watching kind of the emotional reaction or hiding of an emotional reaction, as I would say. And then Michael Phelps came on a little bit later in that telecast and said the words I will never forget of competing is really overwhelming. We just want someone to talk to who allows us to be ourselves, who allows us to be vulnerable and doesn't want to fix us. And I thought, yeah. And so literally in that moment, I completely pivoted my business to work with elite high school and college athletes to train their minds like they train their bodies.
That's wow. Okay. It's interesting.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that you would choose athletes because that's your background, that's what you grew up loving. But what made you into like what got you into sports anyway? Like why swimming as your sport?
Oh, great story. So that actually goes back to when my father was 4 years old and he almost drowned. And after becoming a parent, he said, I have 2 older sisters, and he said, hey, just as a life skill, I want my daughters to know how to swim. Well, when my older sisters were taught how to swim, they really kind of took to it. I come 5 years behind my middle sister. And as my mom tells the story, I had a lot of energy as a young child. I
Mm.
asked for a ton of food from the concession stand when I was at my sister's swim meets. And so she just made the decision, oh, well, they're doing it. You're going to do it too. And I don't remember falling in love with sport. I don't remember like making a conscious choice to be there or stay there. All I can remember, and I still have the feeling, is that I just felt so at home as a swimmer. I never
Mm.
really tried anything else. I didn't, full transparency, never played a game of basketball in my life. It's just where I felt most me, and I didn't have any desire to go exploring. Now I ran cross country for a teeny tiny bit in junior high and a little bit of high school, but it was more of kind of a let's kind of try this out. There was never going to be the this is where I'm going to stay. I always knew I wanted to swim in college. Or, it's kind of an assumption on my part, really. I'm looking back on it now. But yeah, that's where swimming came from. Kind of
Hmm.
random.
Yeah, a little bit. That's interesting that you never even tried another sport. Like usually is if you don't do another sport, it's by choice because especially like basketball and football guys, it's just like, oh, we're doing this and that's it. Like early specialization, I don't care about any other sport, and that's it. That's by choice. But for you to kind of just like, I'm here, so and you just stuck with it. It's just like that's interesting. Like, did you never want to? It just like swimming, just it just called to you and just let you answer the call. Like, oh, I'm here. All right, cool.
Yeah, it was more of an answering the call, though I didn't know I was called to do it, right?
Mm.
I just loved it so much. I, I I didn't feel the need or drive or desire to try anything else. I never felt that I was missing out by not
Mhm.
doing another sport. And again, I'm kind of rare in that respect. Like most people, especially in these days, like go, like try
Oh yeah.
everything, like no specialization whatsoever. And I'm kind of like, well, I mean, it can work for some people if that's what they want to do and that's where they feel most drawn to just do one sport. I mean, my parents never pressured me to stay. They never pressured me to try something else. They knew that I felt right where I was supposed to be, and there were never any discussions to try anything else.
Mm. That is very unique. And I think today it's a little bit different because
Mhm.
a lot of parents will pressure their kids to be like, hey, you're gonna do this sport and you're gonna show up to practice and you're gonna do X, Y, and Z. You're gonna have this level of structure around you to make sure you're succeeding. And how did you feel? Did you like see other kids going through that when you were growing up and doing your thing, or was it just like later on in your career?
Well, I will say this. My parents were the type of people, and I appreciate this life lesson that if we started a season and we got midway through and said, hey, I'm done with this, it was, you're going to finish out the season. You made a
Mm.
commitment to yourself, you made a commitment to a team, that sort of thing.
Mm.
Um, that's a great question. I don't know that I was conscious enough to know. I don't know that I was paying attention enough to know what other
Mm.
kids were going through or what I was noticing. I will say on the team that I was on specifically, and actually to this day, I still talk to people on that team. I started swimming for that team when I was 6 and was finished when I was 18. I have a ton
Mm.
of great friends and we're still connected. And to this day, we even comment on just how special that team really was because it was this collective. We all want to be here. We all know we're a part of something special. We all know we're getting something out of this, even though we probably didn't know that at the time outside of just becoming a better swimmer.
Mm.
Um, so I don't know that I was aware of it, but I see it now as a parent of athletes
Mm.
and just the shift in mindset or attention to how sports are played or to what level people specialize and at what point and to what degree and intensity.
Mm. So, do you feel like that was a? I know you kind of said that you're not against early specialization, and just because that worked out for you,
Yeah.
but with other sports because football is very, very physical. Basketball
Mhm.
is physical, definitely not as close to football, but it has a level of physicality. Would you
Yes.
still recommend that for the sports on that side?
Well, that's a great question. I recommend listening to the athlete. You know,
Mm,
I do believe that athletes, when truly dialed in and given the space to figure out what's best for them, know truly what's best for them. My nephew, who plays for a D1 program, started playing football when he was in kindergarten, so 6 years old.
mm,
Now he dabbled in other sports. He is a world champion karate um, karate person, winner. He played a bit of basketball in high school. He played a bit of rugby, but his sport of choice and the sport that he has done probably the longest, if I'm remembering, is football.
mm,
Again, it was more driven by him than his parents. His parents supported it, my sister and my brother-in-law. But again, you make a phenomenal point. You know, a physical sport like football is much different than swimming, right? There's obviously no contact and you're swimming in water. So, you know, a completely different environment.
mm,
However, in this day and age, I think there is enough awareness in terms of how to optimize and protect yourself as much as possible within that game. Um, and I think it really always boils down to the individual athlete and from a physical standpoint, but also a mental and emotional standpoint, like how well they're bringing all three of those elements together to support themselves through their own journey, along with their coaches and their parents.
mm. Okay.
Yeah, my
So
body
for
certainly was not banged up as much as a football player. That I absolutely will say. So it was a lot easier to stay focused in swimming. Um, so yeah, totally different
oh
sports.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So for the parent, oh, so for the child who is in that situation where they're going through the steps of early specialization and they're going through the sport, and it's not the natural flow of what I want to do, and my parents are kind of forcing me to do this and they're forcing me to do all these things. What should they do? Like, how should they handle a situation where mom and dad is forcing them to play basketball and they're forcing them to do football, whatever? How should they handle the situation?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I'm going to actually give you a very HR answer because that's what I was growing up in. Is it really kind of depends on the individual, right? So the idea, the way that we approach the business is that we empower elite student athletes to create and execute the success formulas that work for them, right? Find the way that makes sense for them to play their game. And so in that kind of situation, would hope that the athlete has a relationship that is open enough to express those feelings, those thoughts, those emotions, those reactions, those whatever they're going through to their parents,
Mhm,
and to have the relationship that's deep enough for the parents to open up and to be receptive of that.
mhm,
I will say, as a parent and as a former athlete, it can be extremely challenging to turn off how you would have approached that situation had you been in their shoes as an athlete. Well, I would have done this as you. Why can't you do this? Or whatever the case may be. And one of the biggest lessons that I've learned as a parent of athletes, but also as a former athlete,
mhm,
it is not my game to play. It is not my journey to navigate. And while I want X, Y, and Z for them because I'm so attached to their outcomes, because they are my children, because I am so emotionally invested, it's my responsibility to find that safe barrier that I can absolutely listen to them, listen to their input, and kind of turn off my, well, this is what I would do. Well, let me find a solution for you. Um, so going back to the original question, honestly, it's not necessarily just what the athlete, quote unquote, should do. There's also the component of where the parent comes into that equation as well,
mhm,
and how to navigate that conversation as a team versus opponents against one another or competitors against one another. Uh,
mm,
it's totally natural and certainly no judgment for anybody who goes through it because fully transparency there. I've had those moments with my own child. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, not my journey. I've got to find a way to create that separation. But from a quote unquote should do, though I never say what anybody should do, to open up the lanes of communication as an athlete, even if it may be really uncomfortable.
So can you give a suggestion on how, maybe say I'm not the most comfortable and this isn't, I don't have the relationship with mom and dad where I can just openly say, hey, this is what I'm dealing with, this is what I'm going through. What is a suggestion or maybe some avenues that player could take to say, just introduce the talk of like, hey, you want me to play this, but I'd rather play that, or I'd rather, be a coach, or I'd rather, what I mean, something else to this. This is the avenue I want to take. So how could a player possibly take that path to that conversation?
Yeah, one avenue could be, check the relationship with coach. Is that relationship maybe a little bit more open and comfortable and free of judgment, or at least less of judgment, to open up that conversation, talk with them, and ask for support from coach of, hey, what might be a possibility for me here? Or could you possibly be with me as a part of this conversation? I'm really scared to have it. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to start. I'm concerned of what mom and dad might say. Just having someone else in their corner to support them through it. Sometimes another avenue, depending on where they fall in their family, or if they have siblings, maybe there's an older brother or sister who, could potentially also be part of that support system, or in place of coach, whatever the case may be, to support the athlete through that conversation. That one is so hard and nuanced because there's so many things and factors that come into that dynamic between a player and their parents, or an athlete and their parents. I guess generally speaking is who within your community, and using that word figuratively and literally, right, that you might be able to lean on to at least initiate a conversation. Because oftentimes where our biggest stress come, whether you're an athlete or anybody, just general human, right, is when we're keeping all of that truth inside and we don't necessarily have somewhere to put it. And we're just spinning and swirling in our own thoughts and emotions and don't necessarily know how to navigate that. But oftentimes when we can at least speak our truth to someone we know may not come back and say, have some judgment or tell us that we're wrong, or whatever the case may be. Sometimes when we can just release it at the very beginning, it helps to relieve the pressure that we've created within ourselves. So it would be, find somebody in your community or corner that you can actually open up to, or think you can open up to, and then start the conversations from there and see where they lead you, in order to kind of build up to mom and dad, if that's the big to do, the big challenge.
Yeah. So what about from the other side? What are some things that mom and dad should look for? Maybe, my child is hesitant to tell me they're not the most, we don't have that relationship, but what are some things that the parent could look for to say, maybe my kid wants to tell me this, but they're not telling me? What are some things that I could look for as a parent? Not me, but a parent could look for to be like, okay,
Yeah, so I'll use my own personal experience, because it took me a while to really kind of understand my older son. One of his telltale signs is when he has a very emotional or angry reaction to something small. And it was kind of like, wait a minute, that response was a little bit more than what the situation called for, right? And I'll have this kind of moment of, oh, wait a minute, I wonder if there's something deeper that's going on. And typically that's what it is with my son. Like, he'll have a higher level emotional reaction to something very small, and it'll kind of come out of nowhere, until I sit down and ask the question, hey buddy, is this what you're really mad at? And just being able to ask a question versus make a directive, or tell him what he's doing wrong, or have a judgmental reaction to his reaction that I thought was kind of quote unquote over the top. by noticing maybe some of those kinds of behaviors and then asking questions and inviting them in, um, has proven for me as a parent, both and as a coach to athletes, that works. It's really about watching your child's cues, because my younger son is completely different. I mean, he'll come up to me and be like, "Mom, this is what's going on. I don't know what to do. What, like, let's engage in this conversation." So every child is different, and oftentimes it's just getting into their cues. But once the gate is open, the go-to recommendation is to invite them in by asking questions. We as parents tend to have that, let me fix the problem, let me make sure I take all your pain away. I want to, whatever the case may be, whatever is going on, I want to be able to fix it and make it go away. Well, oftentimes as parents, when we do that, we remove the opportunity for our children to learn and process the situation for themselves, versus through our lens of like, well, this is what I do. Go do this, talk to him, talk to her, this, and then versus, well, what would you like to do in this situation? Or what would allow you to feel the most comfortable to have the conversation? Or how do you want to show up? How can I support you in getting there? Right. And it's a completely different dynamic. Take some practice. I'm not going to lie. I often don't always get it right. But the moment that I can see even more emotion building up in my kids, that's when it's it's time to ask a question versus give a directive.
So it's not that you're mentally weak. It's just that you don't really understand where your mental toughness is. You don't understand where exactly you're mentally strong at. It's even crazy. You probably don't even really understand what mental toughness actually is. And I don't blame you, because usually we just have coaches yelling at us and fussing at us saying, hey, be mentally tough. You're being weak right now. You're being soft right now. But it's not the full scope, and it doesn't give you any true understanding of what mental toughness is and how you can get better at it. And so I'm here to help you guys out. Because just imagine I gave you a pill right here in my hand. Just imagine. And within that pill, it gave you just a epiphany where you just brain just blew up and you're just like, oh my goodness, you got so much better understanding. Now your game just grows by 10x and you just a whole different person now. Bro, I got the pill for you right here. Never fear. B's Mental Toughness Playbook ebook is here. You feel me? So in this whole little playbook I got for you, just small little ebook, it breaks down the mental game of understanding what mental toughness is in different areas of what your mental toughness is and how you can actually grow it and get better and enhance it. So, look in the link, look in the description, and just go ahead and purchase it and do yourself a favor by just understanding what mental toughness actually is and also understanding how you can actually grow it and what you can do to get better at it. So, just the Mental Toughness Playbook, small little ebook. I'm just trying to tell you, hey, can't say I didn't warn you. That's very interesting. I was actually thinking about this earlier today. I'm not saying I'm right or wrong, but I wonder if, as a parent, do you lose some of your emotional intelligence and like you just kind of like. I think parenting is very difficult overall, and I think sometimes I've heard this before. You're parenting a generation behind, so you're parenting based off your childhood and what you wish you would have had or whatever. And so, do you think that plays a role into a lack of emotional intelligence when you're dealing with children or your child? And like, how do you think that plays a role into everything?
Well, that's a super interesting way of positioning it. And when you said it resonated, is that I will speak for myself. Yes, there are moments when I lose my own emotional intelligence, that I'm tuning more into what I'm thinking and feeling versus what either of my sons are thinking and feeling. And that comes from a very well-intentioned space of, in our situation, having so much love, having so much connection. It's like, I just want to be able to help fix whatever's going on. I want you to come out shining. I want you to be the best you can possibly be. And oftentimes, because there is that such deep connection, and we as parents are so tied to our children's outcomes, that our first go-to, and understandably, is through our own lens. And as you said, like, here's what happened when I was younger. This is what we did. And they're like, I don't care. I don't even know. In terms of my kids, like, I don't even know half the things that were like existed when you were kids. Like, none of that exists anymore, right? So there's that lack of connection in that respect. So I mean, that's an interesting way of putting it. I mean, to a degree, yeah, you kind of lose a little bit of your emotional intelligence because, and again, not every situation is like this, but because
Yeah.
you're so attached to what happens to them, it's just like, I just want to make it better for you.
Mm.
But the only way we know how to make it better is through what we've been through and how we've gone through it, not realizing they're not us. They're a combination of us, but even the stuff that they have that comes from us isn't expressed or doesn't get expressed in the same way. So yeah, we share DNA, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's always the same.
Mm.
If that makes any sense.
I think that makes a lot of sense. So how could a parent separate? They want, like, of course, most parents have good intentions when they're doing what they're doing,
For sure.
but how can you separate the the act of good intentions, separating that from the negative outcome of what you have? Like, yes, I have good intentions, and I keep having good intentions, but the outcome isn't what I want it to be. And of course, you're seeing it impact your child. So how can I, like, tweak good intentions? Say, well, I have good intentions, and that doesn't negate the fact that this hurts the child. So how can we improve that relationship, and what could a parent, look for and do?
Yeah, first and foremost, it's learning about yourself as a parent, and it's understanding what your value system is, where your trigger points come from, and working very consistently and very diligently to how do I put, like, honor yourself in the moment, but also honor your children. So, specific example of that. I through most of my story, I was a very driven, internally driven individual. Like no one has to tell me to go do something. I know what I want to do. Doesn't mean I always like fully initiate everything, but I know what I want to do. And once I'm in something, I will go for it. My children are not that way. My children take a little bit more of care and concern and nurturing in order to kind of rev them up and to get into something. And it wasn't until I started really working on myself that one of my biggest values is ambition, right? I love being surrounded by people who have just as much ambition, if not more than me, like people I can just like try to keep up with, right? That isn't a value for my son, even though as a parent I'm trying to instill this ambition. It just doesn't translate the same for them. And
Mhm.
as I learned more about the how ambition really shows up for me, I start to feel this like internal buzz in me and I want to get going and I want to do. And when I start to feel that for myself, when I'm in the presence of my son's sports, there were times I will walk away. I would like take a walk. Like, let me just
Mhm.
like get a little bit of this energy out. Because what can happen is that there's this concept of mirroring that can really happen with parents, is that because we are so attached to our children, we can create this unconscious sense that we are a part of the game with them, right? I mean, we've all seen parents who get so involved in the game, not gonna lie, I've been there myself, but it's because you're so drawn into the moment and it's like you are actually out there playing and it's like you're just as tied to their outcomes as they are. And so it's about recognizing for the buzz for me, like what's your buzz for you as a parent? Like what is it that you feel is drawing you in? But at the same time, some of those things can be a trigger. So for me, when there are times when my sons aren't like, come on, guys, let's go, like let's find the internal motivation here. It can be a trigger for me because it's not as present in them as it is for me. And when I start to feel that frustration and that buzz more from a negative point, again, I'll remove myself from the situation to give myself a breather so that I can come back in a more neutral position and say, okay, I know what's going on here. I'm getting a little worked up because they're not necessarily doing it the way I would do it, right? That can be a moment for parents of like, oh, if that's the thought going through my mind or that's the thing that's about to come out of my mouth, that can be the point of, oops, this is my line, it's not theirs.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's very important, and that kind of goes to I want to talk about anyway. But um, I've trained a lot of players and coached players and just talked to different players where you kind of spoke about this earlier, where the pressure builds up of what they're doing. And a lot of times, I think a lot of the pressure comes from parents, sometimes coaches too, but
Mhm.
most of it comes from parents and their expectations of, especially if you're following the footsteps of what a parent did. So you're
Mhm.
playing the same sport, or they were great at their sport, or they're great in general. So they're expecting the second coming of greatness, whatever that definition means for that relationship. How can a player deal with that pressure and the stress of parent expects so much from me, but I just want to have fun or I just enjoy doing it? Like, how can a player deal with that when they're dealing with the pressure from mom and dad?
Yeah. But part of it is recognizing that it's even there. Oftentimes we, as humans, right, we get so wrapped up in the pressure that sometimes it becomes such a pattern that we don't necessarily recognize where it comes from. And that's the beauty of what we do, is that part of the idea of creating a success formula that works for you is understanding at the root of what's going on, what is creating the block. And it's about having a support system around you that allows you the opportunity to explore where it's coming from. Because sometimes it can be so ingrained that the answer, I don't know, I just always feel this pressure, and they may no longer be conscious of where it started, because maybe mom and dad never say anything, right? But because we're so interconnected, say anything maybe as directly, but because we're so interconnected, not only as a family but as humans, like that that energy can be experienced. And so sometimes the players may not necessarily know where it's coming from, but in order to deal with it, it's really about figuring out the root cause and not just uh, trying to fix the symptoms. Like, obviously we all know like what it looks like for a player to be under pressure, but in order to overcome that, the ways of doing it is going to be different based on where it actually comes from. And that's where we're a little different, is that it's not just about like, oh, we'll help you deal with the pressure and here's tactics to go deal with the pressure. We try to figure out where that pressure truly is coming from. And oftentimes it really is like talking it out, becoming aware of it in order to figure out how to deal with it. Um, Very nebulous answer that I recognize. However, that's what we believe, and that's the philosophy we follow, is that, it's not this, while pressure can come out looking the same, it
Mhm.
didn't always start in the same place or from the same source. And the best way to get over it is figure out where that source is coming from.
So would you say self-awareness is, I won't say the biggest, but one of the biggest things that if you could grasp more self-awareness, whether player, parent, whoever, that can cure a lot of the issues, or at least be the first domino to fall to resolving a lot of more issues?
100%, I would say it is the biggest. I would be as bold as to say it is the biggest uh, piece of the puzzle. Because
Mm.
once you understand yourself, this was a big aha for me. I was a competitor, right? Like I was ruthless. I'll take you down at any moment I could, right? But any way that I could. And what I didn't realize is that judgment really was never for the other person. It was just easier to place it on someone else because it was so heavy for me. I had so much self judgment. Like nothing was ever good enough when I raced. Oh, I could have done that. Even when I won state, it was like I remember thinking a little bit like, oh, had I just done this, it could have been a little bit of a faster time. Like it
Mhm.
was like, oh my God, Lauren, you won state. Like, celebrate, leave it at that, right? That's great. um, and once I finally figured out that a lot of my judgment and competitiveness was driven by what I was feeling internally and the pressure I was creating for myself, when I started to
Mhm.
root through that, I found that I was wildly less judgmental of other people, that I created different and deeper relationships. And I used to be um, characterized as very intimidating. And I remember the
Mhm.
first time I heard that, and I was like, I don't really feel that I don't feel like I'm a big presence, because internally I felt so small and nothing was ever good enough and all these things. But the way that was translating out into the world was like, oh, she's an intimidating bitch. And once I started working on myself, all of that changed.
Mm. So, first step to self awareness. I know that's kind of a tough thing to do, like
Mhm.
because you could be completely unaware in so many different ways. But the easy first thing, like, hey, to gain 1% more of self awareness, you can do
Game
X,
changer.
Y, and Z.
Yeah, game changer. Because it's not about this like big behemoth, you've got to transform. You oftentimes it really does boil down to like one thought pattern that has created all of these other behavioral patterns. And if you get down to maybe the one, two, or three of those thought patterns, that can be life changing. And quite honestly, just the awareness that you can choose to be and act and think differently, that in and of itself is a game changer, right? Because we often are like, well, this is just who I am. Is it? Or is it
Mm-hmm.
who you learn to be? No judgment, unbeknownst to you, right? We all take in what's going on in our environment. We all create patterns, and we all started creating them when we were 6 or 7, not completely conscious of what the heck was going on. Our brain didn't fully develop until 20 years later. Then it was like, boom, there it is. So simply by recognizing, hey, that if you're not necessarily feeling that you are showing up the way that you want, there is an option to make a different choice. Once you learn, there is another choice to be made.
Mm. So, what is something a player could do right now to gain any ounce of more self awareness? I just want to be gain some self awareness. What's something I could do right now that okay, I'm zero. I don't know anything. Okay, I've gained something now. What's something they could do?
Holy moly, great question. Well, first and foremost is to work with somebody like me and somebody in our company, because we can offer that. However, provided that is, maybe even the step for that, there are times when I worked with some athletes. It's identify the things that make you really mad. Like,
Mm,
what are the one, two, maybe three things that just light your fire on the inside? And it's like that feeling of, ugh, I could, ugh, whatever the case may be. Those are often indications of values that we hold as humans that are either being challenged by the environment we're in or the people that are closest to us, or they're not present. So it's like looking at the reverse of it. So for instance, for me, like ambition. If there's no like ambition in the room and people aren't wanting to like just try something and just like take the energy and move, I'll either get so incredibly mad and annoyed and impatient, or I will be so just like whatever. I don't care, right? Those are
mm,
my two kind of signs of something's amiss here. If I'm not like
mm,
that constant energetic buzz inside of me, if it's not there, or it's to like on level 100 when normally it's on a level 30 because I'm just so revved up and mad, that's usually an indicator. So that's where we can start, is like, what are the things that make you so mad? The inverse or the reverse could be things that are really important to you that either aren't there or are being challenged by someone around you.
mm. I really like that. I was listening to a podcast earlier today. And it's just something similar to that, to where if you want to basically kind of what you were saying, to realize certain things about you, realize what makes you mad, what really bothers you, like takes you to a 10. Like some things that annoy you, all right, cool, that's whatever. That probably annoys everybody. But it's only a few things that really get certain people to a 10. So
Mm-hmm.
like that's a thing like you need to dig into because you'll learn so much off of that. Just to throw a little 2 cent, my little 2 cents in there.
Yeah, no, it's
I just say
great.
simply ask people, like ask your mom and dad, ask brothers and sisters, teammates, classmates, whoever, because we all have a blind spot. And sometimes you can't see that you got something in your teeth, the booger hanging out your nose, but sitting right here in front of me, you can see that, hey, you got a little something right there. Oh, okay, thank you. But having those people around you that will honestly tell you, not, spare your feelings. Like, don't be just rude. Be like, oh, you breath things all the time. Like, there's a way to say it. Like, you want some gum, man? I got some gum right here. You want some? Like, there's a way to doing it, but just simply asking people around you, like, hey, what do you think about me? What do you think about this? Think about that. I think that's a very easy way to do it if you don't have the intuitiveness to dig that deep down emotionally, because that can be a starter track too.
Yes, and I will say that is a great one. I will add to that, right? Oftentimes when we give feedback, we're giving the feedback through our lens versus maybe the other person's lens. So there are times when we can give feedback because we are annoyed at what that person may be doing, right? You can, and so that is for the person giving feedback is, ooh, what about that person doing that is annoying me, right? And that goes for coaches and that goes for athletes, right? So that's one of the really powerful ones is when working with coaches or talking with coaches, like, oh, well, what makes you annoyed? Well, that has more to do with you than it does the athlete. But as the recipient of feedback, to again pay attention to your reaction to what people tell you, even though it is more through their lens than through yours. Like, what are some of your reactions to that? If you're getting really angry, that might be telling you something that they see. You may know, even if you can't explain, that thing is in there too, and that could be, I just don't know how to fix it. But yes, please don't say that it's there. Please don't bring attention to it. But just to be aware of that as the recipient of feedback, like what lights you up, that's a point of self-awareness, and what has an emotional reaction as well. Great points of awareness.
That's a really good one. That's a really good one. I like that. Staying on this same track, just a little bit different lane.
Yeah.
With self-awareness, you talked about a lot earlier with identifying with the sport. I think those two kind of go hand in hand, and I think that is another pressure point because you live and die by the game. You live and die by the outcomes. But how do we get away from that identity of I'm a basketball player? Like, if I ask the kid right now, hey, who are you? Like, hey, let me introduce. I'm B. I'm this, that, and third. Who are you? Oh, I'm the such and such, and I do basketball. I'm such and such, and I'm football. Like, that shouldn't be the boom boom. How do we disconnect those two and really gain a self-awareness of who we are?
Yeah, great question, because we talk about that a lot with athletes. And having been through it myself, had someone told me at 14, 15, 16 years old, like, your whole life isn't about swimming, you won't always be a swimmer, like, it's not going to be that big of a deal, I wouldn't have been able to hear it because it was a big deal, right? So in working with the athletes, we try to find that balance of, we're not telling you it's not a big deal. We're not telling you to thrive in what you're accomplishing. But what if we shift the balance a little bit between the journey or the process, whatever you want to call it, and the outcomes? And because that's what it really is. Because now that I'm 20 years removed, 20 years removed from my athletic career, what I still use and lean on is the process, is what I went through, is how I attacked a hard practice. It has nothing to do with my meet results. Like, I barely remember most of my races. I remember my two biggest ones, but that's it. And I swam thousands of races. So we create a balance between those two things, because at the same time, we don't want to take away from the joy and the connection that an athlete feels to the sport that they do. It's just, how do we kind of shift the pendulum a little bit so it's not fully over to outcomes and this is my identity, but helping them to see, hey, you're going through something, you're learning things. How do we bring attention to that? One of the ways that we do that, and again, this is very specific to every athlete, but one of the things we've done with one of our clients is, she has very big dreams and goals and aspirations that are very specific to the sport. And so versus like, hey, what do you need to learn and do technically to get to this space? We shifted the script of like, what do you need to do mentally and emotionally to get to this space? Like, what are the mental and emotional or spiritual, and by spiritual I mean more like purpose driven kind of goals to that will align to you wanting to get to these big milestones. And one of hers is to, minimize my negative thinking. And so that's the goal we're working on. It has nothing to do with becoming a better soccer player. It's more about how do I become better at not only recognizing my negative thoughts, figuring out where they're really coming from, and then how do I hold myself accountable and find the discipline to shift them when I recognize them.
I really like that. That's a really good one. I like that. So I'll please feel free to poke holes in this, tweak it, whatever. But this is something that I tell my players.
Yeah.
Like in the basketball community, we have this almost toxic culture around like ball is life. I understand how it started off when I was growing up, but now it's turned into a thing like you kind of saying the identity of basketball player, and that's it. So I tell my players, please go hard, like you said, have the work ethic and everything. But a lot of parents or people be like, you should have a plan B, you should have this and like whatever. I'm not. I don't like to tell that because sometimes plan B means plan A doesn't work. I'm going to change gears and go completely over to plan B. And that's not how I define plan Bs, but I understand how the connotation is, whatever. But I tell my players to be layered. Basketball should not be the one and only thing. You should have, please play an instrument, go draw, do art, whatever. Have more things to you than just basketball because you get burnt out so quickly being one track minded 24/7. So that's my little 2 cents on not completely identifying as the athlete or, in my case, the basketball player. So, what are your thoughts about that? Like I said, please poke holes, whatever, because I want to help my players out too.
Yeah, so I agree with that. In term that's what we do as well. We just do it a little differently. Like we help them understand, hey, what about an instrument? What about this? What about something else outside of basketball? Allows you the opportunity to feel the same that you do in basketball, right? So that was kind of my connection point of I felt so alive in swimming. That's why I never explored anything. That's why I never think anything else never came into my purview. I felt so much like myself in that space, despite the fact, I was an overthinker. I had some negative self-talk, whatever the case may be. But in my prime, in my moment, when all that stuff, I could filter all that stuff out, I felt so much like me. So that's where we dive into that self-awareness. That's why I say it's the biggest component of performance, quite honestly, and growth and evolution as a human. And it's about understanding what is it that lights you up in basketball. Because what I've always said is that it's not the sport that makes you who you are. It's simply that the sport allows you the opportunity to be who you are. Like you've just found that avenue that just allowed you to bring it all to life. And you could still find that same space in instruments and hanging out with friends and creating hobbies, paper airplanes. I don't know, whatever, just making anything up. But also honoring if the athlete may not want to explore those things because they feel so much like themselves in the sport. It's more about understanding what drives them to be so connected to the sport. And can we at least shine some light on what those things are so that maybe they can go explore a little bit more outside of the sport in order to take so much focus on, ball is life. Because no matter how great you are, your sport cannot be your livelihood forever, right? And for the majority of us, 99.2%, whatever the case may be, it doesn't become a livelihood for any of us beyond our early 20s if we have the opportunity to get paid for it in college.
Yeah, but even then, average career, you're done 30s, mid 30s, and you have another 40 years after that. And so, the famous, most almost infamous at this point example of determination, you should only have one thing, is Kobe. I'm a big Kobe guy. But the more we learned about Kobe was diehard for basketball. But the more we learned about him, he did have other interests outside of it. Like
he won an Academy Award for crying out
loud. Exactly. Yeah. And so, yes, he dedicated his time to his craft and he went all out for it. He work ethic is unmatched. He's
Mhm.
GOAT tier work ethic. But I don't think that should be the barrier of like, hey, that's the minimum you should be doing. Like, let's not do that. Let's pull back a little bit on that. I love Kobe.
Mhm.
I still have to do that with myself, with my business and how I operate things now. But that is a point of reference to say, hey, you can work hard and do this and the third. And so I think that kind of like I was saying, being layered, like you said, go to the root of what drives you will pull back so much more. Going back to, like you said, self awareness to where you understand 10 more things now about you because I like playing basketball because I like the attention that it has. I like the entertainment and the showmanship of it. Well, if I get hurt and my knees hurting now, because I understand that, oh, I can take this motivation factor and I can go to I want to be a rapper, not the, whatever. It's
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
be a actor, whatever. It's
Yes. Like, where else can you create that showmanship and the entertainment that you learned from playing basketball and shift it over into another atmosphere, right? That's,
mhm.
I mean, it's so much easier said than done. Please trust me. I'm not
Oh
just
yeah.
be like, oh, you just flip of the switch and it's over.
Yeah.
It does take a significant amount of consistent work, just like a physical training plan does, right? But that's what athletes understand. They understand the discipline and the routine that comes from giving something attention. It's just you're now giving attention to something else in a different way.
Look, let's be serious, man. Stop playing around. All right. You didn't got too comfortable. You didn't got relaxed. You forgot that you still got people behind you chasing you right now. You still got people to catch up to. You think just because you won a championship or you had a pretty good game last time that you can relax now. We ain't worried about none of that stuff. Your goal right now is to look at how you were yesterday. Look at the player you were last night. Figure out how to be better than that person. Right now is you versus you. Your goal right now is to make progress in the person that you were last night, the person that you were yesterday. Be the person this week should be the person from last week. The person this month should be the person from last month. On the court and off the court. Personal development too. So right now, progress is the only goal. We ain't worried about what other people got going on. Focus on progress. It's you versus you. It's me versus me. So that right there is your mission. That's your goal. I don't care about who say the best in state is. Who I don't care about any of that. Your goal right now is to be better than you were yesterday. I don't care if you struggling to make the team. I don't care if you the last player they're looking at to make the team. We ain't worried about none of that. Your goal right now is to be better than you were yesterday. I don't care if you're the number one player in the nation. Could care less. Your goal right now is to be better than you were yesterday. So go ahead and get you one of these because you need that reminder because you got too comfortable. That's the issue. You got too comfortable. This can't get you comfortable right here. So go ahead, get you a reminder, get you like a flag hanging as a reminder. Say progress is on the goal. Mm. So kind of backtracking a little bit,
Mhm.
going back to pressure. We talked about this a little bit before we recorded of mental toughness and everything.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, I really want to hear this piece, but I'm gonna introduce it a better way. Most of the time, the conversation around mental toughness is built from coaches and kind of historically around strength and conditioning coaches and that
Mhm.
side of stuff. Please give your definition of mental toughness because I like that a lot. And what can we do to better build mental toughness as I'm calling it for now? So what can we do about that?
Yeah. So as we were talking, I never use the term mental toughness in our organization or with athletes. We use more mental resilience, simply because that idea of mental toughness, it the way that it's evolved and developed is in order to be strong, you have to be tough. And as humans, we all have vulnerable moments. We are not tough 100% of the time, right? We have these cracks in our foundations. And if you're really open to it and exploring the vulnerability of being open, being true, even when it's really true to yourself, even when it's really uncomfortable, those are really, really powerful moments. And so it's more about just flipping the script of like, tough and strong are not they don't always go together, right? There's different ways to be strong and to build strength, and it's not always about putting on this armor, proving to the world that you are this huge, tough persona in the world, whether you're male, female, or anything in between, or non-binary. It's not always about being this tough, I've got to put on this show, because oftentimes when that happens is that we're ignoring the thing that is creating the crack in our foundation, only making that crack bigger. And so every time we kind of ignore it or stuff it down, the crack gets bigger and bigger and bigger until poof, something happens. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, they're not as tough as we think they are. Well, they're not as tough as we think they are simply because they were convincing themselves that tough was the only way to be. And it created the very thing they didn't want to do or to happen to them. So we really focus on the idea of building mental resilience, and this idea that every human has cracks in their foundation. No matter how tough or great or talented they are, everyone has these moments of doubt, of worry, of fear, of whatever negative emotion that we all experience. And it's in the moments where we acknowledge it, we process it, we work with other people to understand where it comes from and then to move through it. That's what builds strength, because you're building resilience, because you're taking the time to understand what knocked you down, what brought you there, and then more importantly, how you lifted yourself back up in order to keep moving.
I really like that. I think that's a more productive mindset to have. Because, like you said, toughness doesn't always equal to strength. But the fact that you, like we said before, being self aware and knowing, okay, I like to say, I need a timeout. Let me sit on the bench for a second and get myself together. Like,
Yeah.
just give me coach. Let me just get myself together. Everybody has that pocket where you can't play the game 24/7. You can't be at this level in life 24/7. But you can be resilient and be tough by getting back up and coming back into the game. And I think that that's a tough concept for athletes sometimes, because we all are just go go go. You
Yep.
like you said, you're weak if you need it's so stupid. You're weak if you need water. You weak if you need breaks. And it's just like, bro, I'm a human being. Like I get what you're saying. I get what your goal is, but 1 plus 1 is not equaling 2 right here. I get what the outcome is, but you're giving me like pie right now. This it's not adding up.
Right.
So
Well,
uh,
I mean, any strength and conditioning coach would tell you that rest and recovery and, allowing the opportunity for your muscles to rebuild after being broken down, like that's part of the science behind it. And, this idea that keep going and going and going and going and going and show no cracks. And if you do, then, that's your weakness, that's your disadvantage, when, really, if we understood where that comes from, and that really comes from a lot of things, just how society has evolved, right? But when we make sense of what that means to us and how it negatively affects us, then we can move forward. But I'm also not saying completely like disregard this idea of hammering through something and finding, the tenacity to get through something. Like, if physically speaking, I mean, that is required as a part of the equation. It's not to like swing the pendulum and completely ignore how the foundation was built. It's more about how do we find a more effective balance between, or more effective harmony, really, between the two concepts, so that it's not all on one side either way, right? Swinging a pendulum too far the other way could cause problems too. So it's a matter of where you're finding that harmony, and that's really what we focus on with each athlete. Is the harmony for me is going to be the harmony that's different for you. But if we can collectively find the harmony, how much more powerful we'd be.
yeah, I think that's very important that we mention that too, because so many times you'll have the mental coaches and performance people who will say, "Hey, mental toughness is not, yelling at the athlete or whatever," and it's like you're almost calling them and being soft. But then the old school coaches who are saying, "Yo, you need to be tough," and I think that we get so caught up that it's left field or right field, or it's right or wrong. But it's like both sides are right and both sides are wrong. Like you said, find that perfect harmony to where it makes sense because I'm not a yeller. I'm not going to scream and yell at you. I'm chilling. I'm laid back, but I will get in you if necessary. And I think that understanding that balance for each player is what the key is, because some players, you can cuss at, yell at, throw a book at the head, and they're going to be like, all right, I got you. Let me get back. Do the exact same thing to the player next to them, you've lost them. Like, that's it. And so we do have to come to a better middle ground, or I didn't even say middle ground necessarily, but like you said, the perfect, the sweet spot for
Yeah.
whatever that player is to get the optimal performance for them.
Yeah.
And so, how could I, as a coach, a strength and conditioning coach, or whatever coach, figure that out for my player? How can I figure out my players' mental resilience and mental toughness to be like, okay, I can push, but not this far, because I don't want to push it. I lose them, and now everything went left. So, what can I do to find that sweet spot for each player?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of comes full circle to what we were talking about when we were talking with parents is like invite them in, ask them questions. Like, you know, ask them questions, right? Of like, what is it that really motivates you? What about my way or behavior or whatever, word you want to use as a coach that really drives you? And you might be surprised in terms of what athletes say and how articulate they are about, hey, this is what really drives me, or this pisses me off, or you do this and I get pushed to a brink that I don't know how to come back from. And then experiment from there, like see what kind of harmony you can create for that athlete, and then get feedback from them of like, hey, we're going to try this. I'm going to try, I'm being upfront too, like, hey, I'm going to try this. We're going to see how it goes. It doesn't work. I want your feedback, and being open to having that feedback come back to you, and having the ego and having no as little ego as you possibly can, and humility to say, okay, that experiment didn't work. We didn't yet find the harmony. Because that's what we do too, is that I'm always open to clients and their parents and their coaches to say, hey, I'm not an expert in what your athlete needs at this moment. I'm an expert in figuring out what truly is going on, where the root cause of things are. Then we're going to work together as a team to figure out what's the best success formula that is going to work for this athlete. We're going to experiment. I want you to come back to me and say, hey, that didn't work at all. Great. And we're never going to touch it again. Or, hey, that kind of worked. I probably need a little bit more data or ways to figure this out. Okay, that's a yellow, so we'll keep it on the list. That really worked. Green, great. We're going to take that. But it's all about asking questions, inviting them in. And, even sometimes I was saying, like, give a heads up to the player if what you're going to try. But I was thinking in my mind that not all of my coaches ever did that. And one of my favorite coaches of all times, one time he made me angry before a race. Like he was just picking at something. I don't remember what it was. I was like 12 years old, but I remember this of like, what the hell? Where is this coming from? And it was before this race it was the tuner free, and growing up, the tuner free was like just an event that I just couldn't figure out. I was a distance swimmer, so it was like too long to be a sprint, but too short to be a distance swimmer. I mentally, I was all in my head about this event. And one time he got me so angry about something, and I swam my best time. And he was like, I came back and he was laughing hysterically, had this big smile on his face, and I was so pissed. I'm like, what are you laughing at? And he's like, I just wanted to try something. It kind of works. We'll have to experiment with what this looks like, because maybe I can get you a little peeved before you go into this, so you're more focused on that and not how you're swimming. So it is all about experimenting and how far can you push your athletes. But he did a ton of work before that to really know who I was, and he and I had a great connection, and he knew that he could push me a little bit beyond what he thought I was capable of, because that's the kind of that's what I responded to, is like I loved to was that athlete of, oh, you don't think I can do this? Oh, let me show you what I think I can do. And he knew that a little bit about me, and so he found a way in that was somewhat unconventional.
I like that. That sounds like something I do with one of my players.
Yeah.
Just, I want to say I'm a mad scientist, but I do like to tinker and just like poke and see just a little bit. I never go too far, but I like to see how players react and think about certain stuff. So
Yeah,
I'm
and
gonna write that
that's
down, put
part
it
of
in
the
my book for you.
experiment. Yeah, and it can be upfront of like, hey, I'm going to try this. We're going to see how it goes. You may not know when it's coming. I'm just going to try it to see what happens. But it truly is about figuring out each of your athletes as an individual, and that is always done through questions and feedback and an open communication line.
Mm. This has been a very good conversation, interview, dialogue we've had here. Anything else that you wanted to go over? Anything else that we feel like
Oh
we
my gosh,
missed?
no, this was a great conversation. I appreciate it. I appreciate the platform. I love the audience's feedback. And any comments or questions you have, we're always open to hearing them, to fielding them, and to supporting athletes or coaches in the best way we can.
Okay. Well, I have two final questions I try to ask
Yeah.
everyone that comes on an interview. Number one is, who is someone that you've noticed that deserves a little bit more flowers? It can be a player that you've had and they just responded greatly. Someone in your business, another coach you see somewhere else is just like, man, nobody really sees how great you are. But here's some flowers right here to, like, I know you're underdog, you little slept on, but here's some flowers to show you that I see you. Like, I recognize your greatness. So who is someone that you could, shout out right here?
Yeah, so I don't know that I can shout out specific names, but I will shout out this team that I've had the opportunity to be introduced to. And, the players are in a situation where they don't necessarily always feel seen and heard, and they're trying to navigate through that. So just a shout out to them in terms of that's why Performance Reimagined exists, is to allow the opportunity for student athletes to be seen and heard and to figure out what works best for you within the environments that you may not be able to choose right now as an athlete.
Okay. So before I get to my last question,
Yeah.
um, I don't know, not you specifically, but like the listeners, the watchers and viewers, are you subscribed to my YouTube channel? Like you're here, you've watched and listened this far to this like all the gems that she dropped at this point. Her alone, she deserves like subscription. Like that's alone. Like and follow. Like that's crazy. You can follow me on all social media at BeBall Jones. That's BE Ball Jones. I should have did this before we recorded, and I completely forgot. So this is my fault. But what social media do you want to plug in? For how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, it's Instagram. It's at performance_reimagined_.
At performance imagine underscore. Make sure that's right.
Yeah. Performance Reimagined.
Reimagine. Hold on. Take
Reimagined.
it back off. I can spell a little bit, just
Yeah,
for
it's
sure.
fine. It's fine. Whatever. They'll
There
find
we
it.
go.
There you go.
Performance reimagine. Okay.
Perfect.
So you can find our guest right here. If you want to get, just some more game, a question I didn't ask that you want to ask her, I'm pretty sure she's open to it, her team and everything. Follow along right here and make sure that you tell her how great she was, because this has been amazing. Like, this has
Well,
been
thank
stuff
you.
that's helped me. I'm a nerd for this stuff. So I continue probably another 3 hours, but respectful of your time. So last question before we get out of here.
Mhm.
You've kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, but as a former athlete, I'm pretty sure you've had a situation where a coach, gave you a certain talk before or after, for you an event, or for us, a locker room speech or whatever, before practice, whatever. A parent came down, talked to us, and gave us some little nugget that it was about the event, about the sport, but now at this point that you're at in life, it's just like, man, I remember they said that to me and it stuck with me. And now so many years later, I still apply this to my life. So, like, what's that thing that you've recognized or someone gave you that you're applying now to your everyday life?
Yeah, so it's actually not a specific speech or talk. It was more of a behavior. One of my I've had several coaches in my life. I think I counted up one time. I think I've had over 50 coaches in my life. And
Sheesh.
of the top three, and I can name them, the one that really stands out is the one who was always goofy with me, who always played around, who always found ways to make me laugh and joke. And that's what I remember. It was the lightheartedness that he brought to what at times could be a very heavy experience. And that's what I bring into my life, is like, how do I have fun? How do I incorporate laughter and humor and just being a little bit, off kilter a little bit, and really just finding that playfulness in life, because at the end of the day, like, we can't control the outcomes. We can only control who we are in that moment. And I've always found that, truly my best performances were when I was just like carefree, didn't care, and laughing and just being light. And so that's what I take with me, and that's what I incorporate into my relationships with my athletes as well.
I like that. You just said something that made my brain go like 10 different other paths. But alas, we have to end it right here. But this was fun. Really enjoyed this. I think I finally enjoyed being able to really go a step deeper into the mental game. We could have went a couple levels deeper, but
Oh, for sure.
yeah, but uh, being time sensitive, we can't go, like Joe Rogan and go 4 or 5 hours and respect him. But I just
Yeah, that's a long time. No.
Yeah, I try, but so. But this was great. Really enjoyed having you on here. I know they will too. There's a lot of nuggets dropped, a lot of tactical and very things that they can apply like right now. It doesn't take some super theological long time thing like I have to sit and ponder on this. Like, no, it's like,
Yeah.
okay, I listened to it, I can apply it right now. So I think that's very valuable. But before we get out here, anything else you want to say? Anything else you want to?
No, if you are a coach or an athlete or a parent who has any questions or has thought about exploring mental training, please feel free to reach out. We may not always be your best source, but we always point you in the direction for those who are our best fit.
So that's it. This was a great time. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah,
so
thank you. This
follow
was awesome.
her. Thank you. Follow her below. Any more questions, comments, concerns? Tell her how great she was, because I enjoyed this. I really enjoyed this a lot.
Thanks so much.
But yeah, that's it. See you guys next episode. Thank you for coming on.